This is Natasha Orbeck.
I have this. I don't know. Can you guys hear me okay with this little guy? So, yes, I'm Natasha Orbeck. Thanks, Willie. First and foremost, I just want to thank you guys all for being here and for what you do. It's not an easy job to have, and I know that a lot of what you do, you need to be able to read people because we all grieve differently. That's something I have learned through this process, is that we all grieve differently on different levels. My in-laws are grieving differently because they lost their son. I am grieving differently because I lost my spouse. So I just typed up a little bit. They were kind of wondering about my husband. So my husband was a state trooper. He came from a very loving, well-rounded family, and he loved the outdoors. He was an Eagle Scout and an avid hunter. He earned his bachelor's degree in biomedical science and moved on to receive his master's degree in law enforcement. Faith, family, and education were huge priorities in his life. I came from a not so well-rounded family, and I joined the military when I was 17 years old. I was from the city and very much enjoyed having stores in close proximity. So being out here has been quite the change. I was not a star student in high school, nor was I the perfect child. I deployed to Iraq in 2008, and that's where my faith really picked up and strengthened. I saw a lot of tragedy there, and there really wasn't anything else to fall back on but my faith. I had never believed in fairy tales growing up. I was not your typical dress as a princess, Prince Charming's gonna come sweep me off my feet. So when I did come back from Iraq, I realized that although fairy tales don't exist, I was ready to share my life with someone. I decided to look online because realistically, who meets their soulmate in a library anymore? I remember seeing Josh's profile and thinking, oh my gosh, he's super cute. And then I saw his occupation. Oh, he's a cop. I'm a rule breaker. So we started talking, and after our first date, we were well on our way to our own fairy tale. It took a year of dating before we moved in together, but once that move was made, we knew for sure we'd follow each other anywhere. Josh took this city girl far into what I consider the country, since there's about a dozen cornfields I passed to get to my house. We were always rooting for each other, lifting each other up, and discussing life changes together. Always. It was always together. I remember him going off to the State Patrol Academy while I was in school for cardiovascular technology. We lived apart in that time, and I was actually pregnant with our daughter, Amelia, who is now 4. So he was stationed 3 hours away, but we made it work. Our love was unconditional, and it stretched further than any distance between us. After a year or so of being far apart and the birth of our daughter, we were finally transferred back to the St. Cloud area. We found a rental while we began to build our dream home so we could stop living like gypsies and plant some roots. I remember for a month he complained of not feeling well, and he would then feel okay after being on meds, but started feeling like crap once they were done. I remember hugging him and saying, mind you, I was an Army medic. I've been in healthcare for over 10 years. And I remember looking at him and hugging him and telling them, after the 5th time of him going to a doctor and just being given antibiotics, they need to draw your blood. You've been sick long enough. But never did I ever think for once that he would actually be that sick. I was just getting off of work, and he decided to go to urgent care with our daughter in tow. I met him there to get her so that we could keep her on our sleep schedule. For those of you who have children, you know how very important it is to keep them on a sleep schedule. I still can't believe I left him there, though. It was 9:30, and I had just gotten our daughter down, and he called and said, they think I have cancer. I don't think I spoke for a time because I remember him asking, are you there? I told him I'd be there as soon as someone came to be with our daughter. I packed our bags and simultaneously called his nurse, who happened to be a friend of mine that I've worked with, and I begged them to recheck the vials and make sure that the blood didn't get mixed up. The next morning, on June 4th, it was confirmed. My Josh had leukemia. Sorry. We made it our mission to beat it, and so the flurry of doctor visits began and plans were put forth. He had a bone marrow transplant in October 2016, and we moved our lives to Rochester while our daughter lived with his parents. I only left his side for clinical weekends because by this point I had already graduated my cardiovascular program and moved on into nursing. It was always tough to leave him because I knew him best, But he always told me to go because he wanted to see me succeed. So once a month, I would go to clinicals and come back to living in the hospital room with Josh. There were many ups and downs throughout his recovery after the transplant. Lots of issues and missteps in treatment. We kept fighting for them to do more about his lungs, but he had improved enough to go home, so in February 2017, we went home to the house we had built and never lived in. You see, we broke ground on our dream home to finally place roots 1 month before he was diagnosed. In April, Josh went back to work, but his cough was still there. And I finally put my foot down and told them, you will do something. For those of you that are married, you know that sometimes us wives can get a little aggressive. So I had to pull out my aggression card and really drive it home with where we were being treated. So we went down for a bronchoscopy to take a look at his lungs, and that's where the downhill spiral began. He went into respiratory failure after the procedure. He would recover from this and undergo further testing and medication trials, etc. Almost a year to the day since diagnosis, on June 1st, 2017, a doctor pulled me aside to tell me the damage had been done. Josh's lungs were now only functioning at 30%. He explained that Josh would probably never be a trooper again, and his quality of life would be poor. And I remember this so vividly because up until that point, I had spent almost every night with Josh in the hospital. This was the first night I spent away from him because I could not look him in the eyes and tell him that he was not going to be able to be a trooper anymore. So I stayed in a hotel, and I told no one about this discussion that the doctor had had with me. I hid it from him, and I hid it from his family, because I truly believed that if we kept fighting, we could win. I never did tell him. I could tell he was growing tired of the treatments and the ups and downs, but I selfishly wanted him to keep going because I refused to admit he wouldn't make it. Josh was intubated another 4 times in the next 2 months leading up to his death. In his final week, the doctor came in and asked Josh if he wanted to be DNR. He was awake and attached to a trach and nodded yes. And I remember saying, whoa, wait. We talked about this. We would not go DNR unless, if you could still have a quality of life. And Josh looked at me and mouthed, I don't have a quality of life now. Josh couldn't hold his own daughter. He could barely speak a full sentence. And when he was on the ventilator, he couldn't even speak at all. The wife in me was so furious that he would choose to give up, as I felt. But the nurse in me knew that that would be selfish to make him continue to fight the way he was. So I said, okay. And we allowed them to place the DNR band on his arm. 3 days later, I made the call to remove his cares, and I laid next to him beyond his last breath. In the minutes, hours, days, months after his death, it was really just a blur. You wonder how you'll make it, how God could have taken such an incredible being, the what ifs and the could I have done more swirl around your mind. Having been in the medical field for so long, I often wondered if there was more I could have done. The what if we would have gotten other opinions lingered, and the tears, well, those came in like a steady stream. I was very angry and pretty numb. One day, my daughter saw me crying and brought me a tissue. And she looked at me and said, I miss Daddy. And I hugged her and I said, me too. And it was in that moment that I decided that it was going to be okay if she saw me cry, and it was going to be okay if we missed Daddy all the time, because honestly, how could we not? Throughout the grieving, I witnessed the many different levels. Parents grieving a son, sister grieving a brother, and a daughter who will never remember her dad except for through stories. I made it my duty to ensure that while she won't get to know her dad, I will not allow her to forget him. I also vowed to give her someone to grieve with on the same level. Upon Josh's initial diagnosis, we postponed chemotherapy to bank his sperm. We were young, in love, and not done making a family. We obviously assumed he would be here, but I guess God had his own plans. I have never met a man more dependable, hardworking, passionate, and humble as Josh was, nor had I ever met a man willing and able to put up with my kind of crazy. He was my calm in every storm. Losing him put me on a path of growth I never really wanted, but I'd say I've come out on top. I could have let his death define me and choose not to move forward, but instead I choose joy and I chose life. On January 3rd, 2019, I gave birth to our son, Gabriel Michael. I chose Gabriel because Josh never argued with me when we were picking names with our daughter. He knew better than that. And Michael for the Archangel, protector of law enforcement. Some days it's still hard to believe I have a baby boy, but I hope one day these kids share in their grief and know how much they were loved by him. The kids keep me going because obviously you can't just throw in the towel on being mom, although sometimes they bring you really close. The biggest things that keep me going is Josh's memory. Our family is complete, and I want them to always know and remember how amazing he was. I started a scholarship fund in Josh's name so that other people can get education in his honor, since education was at the root of his foundation. And above all else, I continue to say his name, speak of memories, and spread joy because I refuse to let his name fade. Because if there's one thing I have learned throughout this grief process is that sometimes people don't know what to say. Sometimes they assume that if they're out of sight, they're out of mind. But by not speaking his name, you're letting him die all over again. Our kids will know who he was. He was kind, humble, courageous, loyal, patient. He had to be patient with a wife like me. Moving forward is a choice, and it's not easy, but it's the life I've been given, and not only do my children deserve a life of love and happiness, but I do as well. My fairy tale was certainly not like the movies, but it lasted long enough for me to know what love is and how to spread that love so that Josh's memory never fades. I continue to move forward by creating a blog, and people follow, called thewillfulwidow.com. I decided that I wanted to share our journey as I had throughout carrying Bridge the entire fight. So I blog, I created a life, and I continue to do things that are completely outside of my comfort zone, like public speaking. And really just try to drive home that it's okay to grieve, it's okay to cry, and it's okay to simultaneously be really happy and excited about life. So that's our story.
Thank you.